I bet when you do work with ADF or Synapse, you imported, or in more appropriate word, ingested data from many data sources through various connectors available in those tools. But have you ever had to export data to external system via API? At the first glance, it looks like a simple task, but when you dug deeper, turns out that the goal is much distant than simple usage of copy or web activity in a pipeline. Let's have a look and why is that and solve the problem. Today I have Nanda with me online, exponential technologies enthusiast, fantastic data engineer lead in my team as we both working in Avadat. But I think Nanda would be better to say it and introduce himself. Nanda, over to you.
Thank you so much, Kamil. So as Kamil was saying, I'm Nanda. I'm currently a manager at Avanade. As part of my daytime job, I help Fortune 500 companies to help build their data and AI strategy. I've been leading certain multiple data initiatives with different companies. One of my recent hobby project was to play with ChatGPT APIs and build an integration on WhatsApp, which I've called it as chatwithaurora.com, which you can see on the screen right now. And I occasionally also write on my own on my blog. And the URL for it is also on your screen right now. Thank you so much for having me here, Kamal.
No worries, my pleasure. So we'll put all those links to the YouTube video so that everyone will be able to just open that without any problems. Cool. Thank you for this introduction, Nanda. And okay, so let's get started. What is the problem? What we are going to showcase today?
Yeah, sure. So today, let me give a brief example of the scenario that we want to look into, right? So let's say there is a sample CSV file, like you have a CSV file that you want to push or upload into a web server using REST API, okay? So this is something that's very commonly done in the development world where, a web server is there, which is exposed via REST API, and we need to upload some kind of file. But the tricky thing is, when we have to do this, achieve this objective using an ADF, Azure Data Factory, or Azure Synapse pipeline, then it becomes a bit tricky. So that's what we are going to dive deeper into it today, in today's session. So with this particular scenario, right, there are certain challenges that we need to overcome. So for example, initially, when you think about this use case, you might go with actually like, okay, why can't I use a copy activity with REST API as the destination and then push the file just as is? But the challenge there is, when you use the copy activity with REST API as the destination, the web server basically does not receive it as a file, but rather receives it as a raw content as is. So whatever file contents are there is just basically present in the body of the content itself. So if you want to push, if the web server is something where you don't have a say on, or you don't own the web server, which is most likely the case, then this approach is not going to work. The other approach,
and for that, I guess we need to just follow some specific protocol, yeah, to just not just sending just whatever it is in body somewhere inside, but we need to just prepare appropriately the request actually that we are sending, yeah.
Yeah, and which is where the next sort of like thing that comes to mind is using a web activity, where okay, why can't we send an attachment using web activity? However, that is also not just straightforward, right? So you inside the web activity, you may see something like there is an option to add a dataset reference, there is an option to add a link service reference. So you might be wondering like, okay, why can't we go and use it? So I've tried using it, but unfortunately what I actually noticed was this is actually a sample payload schema of what the request would look like. So you can pass the dataset, you can pass the link service. However, with this specific approach, the challenge is that this approach expects the web service or the web service endpoint to receive the data set and the link service and then process it on the server. So it's not just a file that is being sent to the web service, but it is actually the link service connection string and the data set connectivity that details that are being sent to the web service endpoint and is expected to be processed on the server.
And this is
So
not our case. It's not our case. Actually, let's assume we don't have control. Our case is that we don't have control on the endpoint, on the remote server. Yeah, we need to just follow the documentation how the remote server expect us to send a request, and we need to just follow this and do this appropriately. We cannot build the code at the end. Yeah.
exactly, and that's where we need to specify. So the approach that I'm going to show you in a moment is where we construct the body appropriately so that the file is sent as a file rather than just as a raw content. So before we move on, so the next set of thing, like, so with this approach, what we want to understand is we need to construct an HTTP MIME request. Yeah, so what you're seeing right now on the screen is an example of how this MIME request is being, constructed. So this basically has a set of series of parts. So the first one is like, the content type, where it has the header with the boundary. So this boundary is a random set of characters that is not repeated or used in any of your content or in any of your blocks of code that you are going to write. So this boundary code will basically, split between different sets of content that you need to pass to the server. And that's what you're going to see in the rest of the example as well. So it has the different parts of the form, as you can see. So you start with the double hyphen and then the boundary code that was being used, and then you specify the content disposition, okay, and say that, okay, this is actually a form data, and you're actually trying to pass some sort of like text here, and then you leave a space here, and then you specify what the text value is. In this case, it is just hello. And that basically, comprises of one form element that is being passed to the server. And then comes the next line where you have again another double hyphen followed by the boundary value. And then you specify again what the content disposition is. In this case, it's the form data. And then you specify the type to be file. So here you're basically saying you're attaching a file to the body. And the name of the file is going to be samplefile.csv. And you also specify the content type as CSV. And here, contents of sample file.csv, right? So here is where you put all your content of that particular CSV file, and then
the whole body of that file. Yeah.
Exactly.
Are you saying that because I think that you are sharing this example here, but I think there's two examples here, right? Am I correct? The first part is like a name text and the body, and then the second part is different kind of approach when you can just send the request like, okay, this is the file.
Correct.
Yeah,
that's correct. Okay. So yeah, so I just want to make sure that if you want to pass more than one value, so like it's not just file, but you also want to share or send something else to the server, then you can also do that. And this is an example.
So actually you can do it in one request. Let's say you can
yes.
mix other approaches. Okay, great, yes. Fantastic.
So yeah, so that's what this consists of. And then the last line is,
this looks a little bit complex at the beginning if someone just first time look at this. Yeah, like do I need to have like some special skills to build that, some networking skills or something, or do I need to have extra knowledge about HTTP protocol maybe?
Yeah, so this is not related to networking. So this requires a little bit of knowledge about HTTP protocol, like how it works and how a body is constructed in that sense. And then, we also need to understand how the boundary values work and what this typical structure would look like. It's very similar to like, how you would write code in a different language, but it's just that this is how HTTP protocol works. And this is how the body is being parsed by web servers. Yeah, so that is the thing that you need to be aware of. And this is a very clean and clear example online as well. You can identify different examples of how to construct a specific body in this way. And you can also use a client like Postman, for example. If you have a server and you can use a client like Postman and test your API endpoints. So there you might also find an option to say like, okay, what does the HTTP code look like? So there is an option where, you have a list of drop downs of different various languages that you can use to connect to that particular endpoint, and HTTP is one of them. So if you specify HTTP, you'll clearly see what you'll clearly see something very similar to this, which will have the boundary, content type, and whatever parameters, whatever form data that you are passing to the web server endpoint.
Right. Okay, cool. Thank you.
Yeah, and then the final part is where you again have the double hyphen, and then you specify the boundary characters, and then you say that this is actually the end of the body construction by specifying another double hyphen at the end of this particular boundary value. So that way, like you know for a fact that this actually ends. So the boundary, you start with the boundary and then you end with the boundary, and then this has sort of completed it.
Because between this boundary key between the first and second, actually there might be actually everything. Yeah.
That's
so
correct.
I guess I mean, you must weigh some unique enough key to just not repeat this in between, yeah, in this body that you will be preparing here, yeah. So I guess it might be anything, but must be unique enough, yeah.
Absolutely, Kamil. That's correct.
Cool. So I think the next challenge would be to just build the whole request, yeah, the whole
Yeah.
text.
Yeah, that's what I'm going to do now. So let me go to Azure portal and go to full screen. Okay, so here I already have a sample file uploaded into a storage account. And if I quickly show you the content of the files, right? So if I click on this and then go to edit, so here you can see I have a proper CSV file, a very sample CSV file, employee ID, first name, blah, blah, blah. And it's all separated by commas. It has an email address, it has a phone number, salary, etc., right? So this is something that you would typically see in a CSV file. Now, if we go to Azure Synapse, I've already have it opened, and I open the pipeline that I've built for this demo. So here, so all it requires is like, a set of activities that will read the CSV content, place it appropriately in the body, construct that body, and then use that in the web activity. Yeah. So the first activity I have here is a lookup activity, which basically gets the content of the CSV file. If we go to the settings and open the data set, here is where it is very critical, and it is something that we need to be conscious about. So here you may find that you have the column delimiter and the row delimiter. In our files, in typical scenarios, when we are reading a CSV file, we'll specify the column delimiter as something like a comma, and then row delimiter as something like a new line or something, right? So in this case, what we want to achieve is we want to read the entire body of the file into one cell, one row, one column, all of the content in just one particular cell, right? So I'm using a delimiter, both column delimiter and row delimiter, of something that is not present in the file. So I've used pipe symbol here based on your use case, based on the contents of your file. You may want to pick something that works on your case. So this is something that you need to be aware of. And then you should also not check the first row as header checkbox here, because you would also want the header to be part of the file that you want to send to your web server. Yeah.
Yeah, so this is important. We need to, in this step, we want to just read the whole body of the CSV file. We don't want to interpret the file, yeah? We want to just read it as a raw body, yeah?
Yes, exactly. That's correct.
Cool.
And then I use a variable to set the contents of it. So if I go to settings.
Before we move on, could you show us what kind of variables we have defined in this?
Sure. So here in the variables, I do have like 4 variables here. Variable body, which is empty by default, which is something that we will see in the third step here. And then we have a URL here, which is a webhook URL. So I will, at the time of running, I will also show you how the request actually comes to this particular URL. So this is the URL that we are going to use in the final step in the web activity.
It's a remote server, yeah?
Yeah, that's a webhook. Yeah. And then we have a file name. I've given the value as sample file.csv, and then I have a file contents variable, which is empty by default, but this is the variable that we're going to set some value for.
And of course, all those values we can dynamically assign, reassign, generate, whatever is needed, yeah, on our case.
During execution, yes, that's correct.
Cool.
Yeah, so here if I go to the set variable for file contents, so here it basically gets the activity, the previous activity output, and gets the first row and then gets the value. So prop underscore 0, right? So at the time of execution, I'll also show you why we have to use this prop 0, because when you have just one element, it has a key value pair, and the key here is prop underscore 0, and the value is the entire body of the file that we are trying to read. So we are specifying, okay, prop underscore 0 is the key that we want to use. And at the time of execution, this will basically read the entire content of the file and place this into this particular variable.
And also let's mention that this prop underscore 0 is actually default name for the first column if you don't use the treat the first line as a header. Yeah, so
That's
this is the
correct.
default. Yeah, because we don't know what is the column names, so this is the default one. Yeah. That's why
correct.
we are using this prop underscore 0 here, yeah? But you will show that us in a second. Cool.
Yeah. And then comes the critical part where we need to set the request body. So if we go to settings, go to the value, and then expand this a bit more. So this is very similar to what we were seeing on the slide, right? So you have a boundary value here, and then you have the content disposition, form data. Here I'm just passing just the file here. So the name is file, and then I'm getting the file name from the file name variable. I'm setting the content type, and it is all basically, concatenating different sets of characters. So concatenating all these fixed characters, concatenating it with the file name, and also concatenating it with the file contents. So now, it is very, very similar to what we were seeing on the slide where all the contents, so at the time of execution, the contents will be printed here. And you also need to be careful about the new line characters that are present here, because, the HTTP MIME protocol basically expects you to have specific new lines to be added at a specific place. So immediately after the content type is specified, you need an empty line before it is followed by the content of the file. And then there is no line, there is no empty line or anything, and then you end it with the boundary.
So there's actually in here, when we are building this body, there's no space to make a mistake, yeah? I need to be very precise. If you make a small mistake here with this code, or maybe you forgot some new line, it will just not work. And I guess probably will probably spend hours trying to find out why.
That's true. That's true. And it is very, very important that you avoid mistakes. There are the webhook site that I'm just going to share in a few moments is something that you can use to test what is actually being sent into the server. Yeah, so you can also trace that as well. All right, so that closes the body. But now when we move on to the web activity, here in the settings, things might look normal. So you will have the URL specified here coming from the variable. You will use the method as post. You also specify the variable as where body. And one other key important part here is setting the content type. So from the slide, if you remember, the content type is something that was not there in the body because it needs to be added as a header. So the content type. Yes. So the content type is the name of the header, and then the value is multipart form data, and then you specify the boundary here. So the boundary value has to be exactly the same as what you were using in the construction of body, and you need to see that there is no double hyphen here. So
yeah, exactly, because in the set variable in the previous activity you had this double hyphen at the beginning, yeah.
Yeah.
So that's another very important part, I guess. Yeah. Here you have the key, but when you are constructing the body, you need to add 2 hyphens, right?
That's correct. That's correct.
So no more, no less. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Just exactly 2 of them.
Yeah. Yeah. So in this example, you may notice that, it is just a set of characters. There is no hyphen in the boundary. But when you use Postman and look into the HTTP examples there, you may notice that the boundary value might actually come with some extra hyphens here. And in all those cases, although it may be slightly confusing, in all those cases, even if you do have any extra hyphens at the start of the boundary name here, you need to make sure that you add two more double hyphens when you're constructing the body. So that is another important aspect that you need to keep in mind when you are working on this.
Cool. Yeah, that's very important. I think another enhancement of this code would be we could actually put this key as a variable here and also concatenate whenever needed. Yeah.
Yeah,
So in that way, we would potentially avoid a mistake. Yeah, but that's very
absolutely.
important part. Yeah, to not make any mistake with this. Okay, cool.
Absolutely. Thanks, Kamal, for adding that. Yes, absolutely. So
So you know, you will
now,
see your version of your code version 2.0. Cool.
so
Sorry, carry on.
now I'm gonna run this pipeline. But before I do it, I want to quickly show you this webhook as well. So for people who are not familiar with this webhook.site, right? So this basically helps you to test your API endpoints. So if you go here, if you go to this webhook.site URL, you'll be prompted with a unique URL which you can use for your own testing purposes. I'm currently using this URL. So when I run the pipeline, the post request will essentially come to this URL. And as you can see on the left-hand side, it says it is waiting for the first request. But when I run the pipeline, and at the time of successful completion of the web activity, it will basically complete and start giving me the first request here. So
okay, so let's wait a few seconds. And in the meantime, let me ask, so here we are reading CSV file, but I guess we can read any other kind of files. It might be JSON or it might be also any binary file, I guess, yeah?
yes, that's the part here. Yes, so you can read a JSON. You can also read a binary file, like if you want to read a PDF file or whatever. So PDF file, you need to make sure that you actually pass the binary content itself into the body rather than the actual, like you don't have to necessarily open the file and then pass the content, but you need to pass the binary version of the content, and that's where the content type becomes very critical, because that content type specifies how it has to be treated, how the file contents have to be treated by the web server. So that is something that needs to be taken into account as well. So the pipeline
So
is still
today
being queued.
Synapse is a little bit slower for some reason.
Yeah, we'll give it
It's
a
still
moment.
it's still under SLA, yeah, under 4 minutes. So don't worry.
And once you get an instance, I think it just comes through.
And now the last activity is running, I think, when I saw correctly.
Yep.
So it should appear here in a sec, yeah?
Anytime. Yep.
Are you sure we have exactly the same URL address, 5D and etc.? Ah, it's still processing, okay.
Still
In
running.
progress.
Yep. That was weird because it took 4 plus 2 seconds, 6 seconds to run the entire pipeline last night. And sometimes it just,
Yeah,
takes a while
yeah.
for it
And
to get
actually this is
resources and
something
get warmed up.
out of our control, yeah?
This is out of our control, yeah. And this is,
And as I said, if you guys can check in the Microsoft documentation, it's still under SLA. Yeah, SLA for one single activity is 4 minutes. Yeah, so of course, in most of the time, it will take much faster, but sometimes it can happen like something like this. Yeah, when simple activity takes, instead of seconds, it takes minutes. Okay, we have something here.
yeah, so there you go. So the post request that we just made has made its way here to this webhook site. And as you can see here under the file section, you can see the file here. And if I download it, it will download a CSV file. And if I open it on a notepad, you will see that all the content that we were seeing on the storage account has come through as we expected it to be.
Great. So we have exactly the same file in the received by the remote server. Yeah.
Yeah. So that ends the demo. There are a few considerations that we need to keep in mind as we work to implement this solution. So this approach works for majority of the web servers, but some web servers basically behave a bit weirdly on how these new lines are being formed in the body, right? So I'll add a link to Greg Lowe's blog, which basically details a bit more about like what are the different options that are available to handling this new line approach, how you need to handle the new lines when you are actually constructing the body. There's also another assumption where we assume that the ADF variable can hold the entire content of the files. So it may be tricky when you need to deal with larger and larger files. And as Kamal, you were saying earlier,
is there any limitation about the size of the body? Have you seen any limitation about this in Microsoft documentation?
Nothing that I have seen so far. So I think there should be some sort of like limit to how much an ADF variable can hold. I don't think there is any explicit documentation about how many characters or how many bytes a particular ADF variable can hold at this point in time. But it is something that you need to keep in mind when you're working on the solution.
Definitely, and I think that might not be the right approach if you want to send some like maybe megabytes should be still okay, but gigabytes definitely not. Yeah. So for gigabytes or bigger files, we should choose another different approach. Yeah, like sending. Okay, this is the pointer. This is the URL of my file. And of course, the firewall and everything should be appropriate, configured and open for third-party servers or company to be able to just, access this from our place. Yeah.
Yeah. It depends on like individual use case, but yeah, what you described is another potential solution. Again, depending on the problem statement that we need to look deeper into that as well. But yeah, and like we were saying, other file types can also be uploaded using a very similar approach. It could be a text file, it could be a PDF document, it could be anything, but you need to make sure that the content type is set appropriately, and then the file is read appropriately. Like you can read the contents for text and CSV file, but you need to read the binary data for PDF and all other kinds of formats. Yep.
Cool.
So
Fantastic.
that ends my session. Any other questions, Kamil, that you wanna?
No, I think that's it. We'll see if our audience will have any questions on under the YouTube video. So thank you very much, Nanda, for this presentation. Fantastic. I think, and I hope that this will help to a lot of people when they face a similar issue or they will face some challenges related to that kind of approach. Because as we said, that Microsoft documentation is not very clear about this specific approach, this specific mechanism, yeah, of sharing data files, yeah. Thank you very much, Fernanda, for your time and for this fantastic presentation.
Thank you so much for having me here, Kamil. Thank you so much.
My pleasure. Thanks. Bye.